New white papers have been released about the detention camps keeping millions of Uyghur Muslims in China. Around 1.3 million people a year is being put through these detention camps and at least to some extent being re-educated, or as the Chinese government calls it, vocational training. Another report recently came out showing how most of these prisoners, after they've been re-educated, are then being shipped off directly to Chinese factories. Factories that, by the way, make products for companies like Nike and Apple. These white papers were just released, so more information will come out, but they're already painting a really bad picture, adding to an already horrible situation. The tricky part here is that the Chinese government is saying that they are reacting to threats of terrorism in the region, and they're not actually wrong. We're about to find out what exactly is going on in today's video, so stay with me, we begin right after the intro. Alright, welcome to my channel guys, my name is Soren. So you probably heard in the news about these Uyghur Muslims being kept in detention camps in the Xinjiang region of China. We for a long time had an idea exactly how bad the situation was in terms of human and basic rights. But now with these white papers being released, we are beginning to be given a much better idea of exactly what's going on. It is a rare insight into something the CCP has been very successful in keeping a secret for a long time. So let's start out by reading this The Guardian article. Clues to scale of Xinjiang labor operation emerge as China defends camps. Beijing white paper says an average of 1.29 million workers a year have gone through vocational training between 2014 and 2019. So right off the bat, that is a staggering number. 1.3 million people every single year going through these detention camps. The article goes on to read. The Chinese Communist Party government has defended its system of internment camps for Uyghur and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang in a white paper that also reveals some details of the breadth of its labor program. In the document published on Thursday, Beijing called them vocational training centers, saying through its proactive labor and employment policies, Xinjiang has continuously improved the people's material and cultural lives and guaranteed and developed their human rights in every field. I mean, calling detention facilities vocational training centers, I don't think is going to fool anyone. And then on top of it, they add that they guarantee and develop their human rights in every way. I don't think these prisoners feel like they're basically on a holiday in these Chinese prisons. Figures included in the report hinted at the scope of the program. It said an average of 1.3 million workers, including 415,400 from southern Xinjiang, had gone through vocational training every year between 2014 and 19. Although it didn't clarify if or how many times people had gone through the camps. Adrian Sens, an academic and author focusing on Xinjiang, said the number instead gives us a possible scope of coercive labor through the centralized militarized training of rural surplus laborers. So yeah, the training of rural surplus laborers is another controversial thing about this whole issue. So reports are coming out about how these prisoners, when they're done serving their time in the detention center, are being shipped directly to these enormous factories in China. That's after they've undergone what they call the re-education, the deconstruction of their culture, and they are taught Mandarin. But more on that later, let's just finish up this article first. The accusations are strenuously denied by Beijing, which claims its policies are to counter terrorism and alleviate poverty. However, journalists and human rights groups are heavily restricted from inspecting the highly secretive camps. There is increasing international pressure on China to end its practices against minority Muslims in the region. They include sanctions, US bans on Xinjiang imports, and companies such as clothing giant H&M cutting ties with the region's producers. Alright, so two important points I want to mention to this specifically. I find it really frustrating when these huge companies that are working with China are taking a strong stance against the Xinjiang region, but they pretend like they don't understand that the orders for the Xinjiang region is coming directly from the Chinese government. This isn't just a regional problem, this is being done under the orders of the Chinese government. So I find it frustrating when these companies are like, no, we're just going to cut ties with a certain region within China, but we understand it would be too expensive if we cut ties with all of China. I mean, we would take a small hit in the profit in one of our quarters financially, right? We would take a small hit, and we don't want to upset our stockholders. We don't. I mean, and secondly, I always try to see things from both sides. In this case, it's difficult, but let's try. Before these detention camps were created in Xinjiang in China, mainly for these Uyghur Muslims, the Chinese government and the Xinjiang region had massive problems with terrorism for decades. The Chinese government tried all of the things that we expect our own government to try, that you increase the police presence, hope that that helps. You try to alleviate poverty. You try to make sure that everyone have what they need to have, but none of it seems to have worked over the last decades. There are Muslims living throughout China seemingly freely and coexisting with other ethnic groups. So this problem is very specific to the Xinjiang region. So these detention camps is kind of the final option that the Chinese government thought they had to make to subside, to make sure that the terrorism subsided, to alleviate all of the problems that the region was facing. The problem here is that these Muslims are being treated as a people and not as individuals. They're being rounded up indiscriminately and being put in these detention centers. Sometimes they spend years being re-educated, breaking down their culture, their religion, and their language, learning a new language, being re-educated to be put back as laborers, as we read earlier in the article, for these factories. You can imagine how that would break down most people, especially if you're innocent and have committed no crime. So after their re-education, a huge amount of these Uyghurs are being sent directly out to these factories and facilities as a workforce. Take a look at this. China transferred detained Uyghurs to factories used by global brands. At least 80,000 Uyghurs working under conditions that strongly suggest forced labor. At least 80,000 Uyghurs have been transferred from Xinjiang province, some of them directly from detention centers to factories across China that makes goods for dozens of global brands, according to a report from the Canberra-based Australian Strategic Policy Institute. ASPI. Try saying that 3 times fast. Using open source public documents, satellite imagery, and media reports, the Institute identified 27 factories in 9 Chinese provinces that have used laborers transferred from re-education centers in Xinjiang since 2017 as part of a program known as Xinjiang Aid. In conditions that strongly suggest forced labor, the report says workers live in segregated dormitories, are required to study Mandarin, and undergo ideological training. Ideological training is a very nice way of saying brainwashing. Not that the rest of what the article talks about is very nice either. I find this issue really interesting because the Chinese government did have a huge problem with terrorism in the Xinjiang region. Now that they've built all of these detention centers, that issue is almost gone, and they had it for decades. Now that they have these centers, you see crime and you see terrorism diminishing almost to a standstill. But you have to wonder if the Chinese government feel like this is worth it, to treat everyone the same way as if they've all committed the same crime, when probably 95% of people are completely innocent and they're still being put through all of this re-education, breaking down of your very own culture and your language, your faith, all of these things, coming out on the other side with a future where you have to work in these Chinese factories. You can see, you can understand, since they had this huge problem with terrorism and it was so violent and so intense, you can understand why they wanted to intervene, do something drastic. But I find it really difficult to justify treating everyone the same way. Obviously, it goes against everything that we in the West believe in, that we try to hold dear, the right that not everyone is the same. It leads me to think what we would do in their case, what we would do if we had a region in our country that was completely infected with terrorism and there's no way to quench it, no way to calm it down. I think we would take to extreme measures, especially if it went on for decades. I think at a certain point, you would let the government do things that they wouldn't normally do. But obviously, I condemn the way that it's being done here, that you're judging a whole people on the acts of the few. I do have a problem with the way that the media in the West tries to paint a picture of the Chinese government just waking up one day being extremely angry at Muslims, putting them all in detention camps. As I said earlier, there are Muslims living alongside other ethnic groups in China, spread out all throughout the other regions. This is a strong and very tough, very violating reaction to a problem that was within one region. So I don't think they're being fairly presented in the news media in the West. So I'll give them that. But obviously, they're grossly violating a bunch of human rights at the same time. Either way, I wanted to give you guys some insight into the newly released information about this whole detention center issue in Xinjiang in China. So thank you so much for watching this video. Remember to subscribe to my channel if you liked it. And the best way you can help me out is to share this video on your social media. It makes sure that these very important undercover stories gets out to more people. Thank you so much for watching again, and have a really good day. I'll see you guys tomorrow. God bless you.